Hey Moon lovers, welcome to another episode of All Things Moon, Lunar Wisdom for Everyday Life with myself, Kelly Jones. And so I am usually more focused on the moon phases and a general overview of what's going on astrologically. But today I'd like to share with you a little synopsis of Uranus's ingress into Gemini. Yes, the last major shift of planetary energy is almost here. I am recording this as Jupiter is kazemying the sun, said to be the luckiest day of the year. But I have a very short time to fit in as much as possible for you. So Uranus will be moving into the sign of Gemini on the 7th of July, which happens to be my birthday. And as you all know, I am very happy that Jupiter is now in the sign of Cancer since the 9th of June, which was a massive relief after that Mars transit over my Mars for about 6 months in the sign of Cancer. So a really different energy today. So Uranus moves into Gemini for the first time in 84 years, because that is how long it takes Uranus to travel around the whole of the zodiac. So I want to have a quick look at some past cycles and transits of Uranus in Gemini, a little bit of a reflection on Uranus's 7-year stay in Taurus, and hopefully a quick tip on how to work with this transit in your own chart. So Uranus enters on the 7th of July and will turn retrograde in Gemini on September the 6th. So it will spend briefly a little bit of time back in Taurus from November the 7th until the early part of 2026, and it will return back to Gemini in April next year, 2026. But that return into Taurus will give us some closure on all the topics associated with Uranus's stay there. So things around stability, material security, our physical world, our resistance to change. And I'm sure you can agree with me that in the past 7 years, we have been catapulted into having to change and let go of the old ways. Although some are still clinging on to the shore, a lot of us have just had to let go and see where that Uranus energy is taking us. So Uranus in Taurus was associated with changes in money, our values, those Venusian things like material possessions, wealth, finances, food, agriculture, but ultimately our material security. So we have seen radical change in all those subjects over the past 7 years, and maybe this closure will see an end to our preoccupation with material possessions and, being an influencer in the world and things like that, and more of an emphasis on how we communicate, Gemini, and connect with each other over the airways. Things to do with travel, communication, things like flying cars and AI technology. Uranus doesn't do time like Saturn, Kronos does. It's quantum in its energy. It can bring sudden, shocking, disruptive, innovative, eccentric, maverick change. Historically, Uranus transits through Gemini have been very eventful, disruptive. It comes with a bang. Uranus entering any sign can come with a bang, and I myself can give you a little story on looking back at Uranus's entrance into the sign of Taurus 7 years ago for myself, and the sudden shocking impact that made in my life. Uranus is regarded as signifying the rebel, the awakener, the individualist maverick, the revolutionary. In Greek mythology, Uranus is known as a primordial deity, the personification of the sky and the heavens, the airways. Uranus, or Uranus as it was known, was born from chaos, emerging as the partner of Gaia, heaven, Uranus, Gaia, earth. Together, they are considered to be the parents of the first generation of the Titans and Cyclopses and those kind of monstrous images. In the Roman era, Uranus was depicted as Ion, the god of eternal time, that quantum time, no time. So unlike Kronos, the god of time, is most certainly that quantum no time energy. And behind me here, these two planetary gongs are actually Saturn and Uranus, which came into our lives here for me and my partner. He is an Aquarius and he chose the Saturn gong. And then he didn't like being out in the world performing on his own. So he asked me to join him. So I ended up buying Uranus. And throughout 2021, Saturn and Uranus were in a square, 3 squares of challenge to each other. And that was really signifying, if you remember 2021, Saturn restrictions on Uranus's freedom. So that can show you how these planetary energies can play out. The last time Uranus was in Gemini was from 1941 to 48 time. And if we look back in history, we can see that, there was a whole generation that was shifted by the global impact and changes that war brought about. Now, this move of Uranus into Gemini, again, doesn't necessarily suggest war, but we are at the moment seeing that. But if you look back to children born during that time, they would have been young adults during the 60s, which brought about great societal upheaval, that free love, civil rights movements, anti-war protests. Uranus in Gemini opens up that Mercury ruled planetary mind aspect, the air, the thought, the mind, how we think collectively and personally. All the mutable signs, Gemini, Pisces, Sagittarius, Virgo, will be impacted by this energy shift for sure. But we will all be experiencing it in some way. If you know your rising sign and you have your birth chart, so in Hellenistic astrology, we use whole sign house chart system. Take a look at where Gemini is placed in your chart, and then you will be able to see which area of life this Uranus energy will be impacting. So for myself and Tom, my partner, we're both Sagittarius risings. So Uranus moving into Gemini will be in our house of partnerships and relationships, which is going to be interesting for sure. I know that Uranus entering Tom's Gemini house of relationships will be immediately hitting his Chiron, with Venus there, with Uranus at that beginning stage as well, which, just has relationships written all over it. For myself, it will be opposing my Neptune. So coming out of our comfort zone, which is what Uranus does, is for sure. How that's going to play out, who knows, because anything can happen when Uranus is involved. If you're 84 years old, you'll be experiencing a Uranus return. And to give you an idea of how this can already be playing out, my stepfather was 84 last year. My mum will be turning 80 this year. Uranus returns marks that period of time in life if you get to the age of 84, because that return will only happen once in a lifetime if you live to be of that age. That's a time when that freedom to be yourself as an individual, rather than conforming to what society wants you to be, is no longer your concern, and you can just let go and not care what other people think, for sure. That really does fall away. But Uranus represents your independence as well. So it took my mum a few years to convince my stepdad to move to a retirement village. And all of a sudden last year, he was up for the idea. At the age of 84, they moved into that retirement village where assisted living is possible, even though they still have their freedom and independence there right now. So you can see how this energy has already played out for them. Uranus entering any sign can come as a shock. But in Gemini, there's this dynamic energy that kind of triggers revolutionary things, innovation, sudden awakening, rapid change. It's the innovator, the inventor. So these AI technologies that we have already been experiencing, we already know that there are such things as flying cars that park themselves, travel, is going to, just go quantum. It is going to be at the speed of light. Who knows if that will be possible as well. Also with Saturn and Neptune traveling together through that early new beginnings sign of the pioneering spirit of Aries. Aries, with Saturn representing boundaries, borders, restrictions, foundations, and Neptune, that nebulous and dissolving energy, could dissolve boundaries as we see people travel to and migrate to different places, maybe even country boundaries and borders changing, because things in our society and culture are going to shift so rapidly. Uranus in Gemini historically has brought this subject of right versus wrong to a very heightened state, waking us up to being more aware of what it is to be a human, the expansion of our consciousness. So just to finish off with that little reflection of Uranus entering Taurus, when I was researching this subject, I looked back to see when when Uranus entered Taurus, and it was May 2018, which meant Uranus entered my sixth house of daily routines and health, and boom. Literally within a few days of Uranus arriving in Taurus in my sixth house, I found myself in hospital having emergency surgery because my appendix was perforating. At the time, I was trying to take a sabbatical from work because I was grieving for the sudden loss of my dad. And I was running a Pilates and yoga studio. I was doing that for 16 years, and I just needed to stop and be free from it. And I just couldn't work out how. It had taken me 6 months to get that time off. And with 2 weeks before my 3-month sabbatical was due, I was in emergency surgery. And from that day forwards, I never went back to my own business ever again. A few months later, I found myself in New York in between 2 eclipses, eclipse in the sign of Cancer, my sign, an eclipse in Aquarius, that Uranus energy. And whilst I was in New York, I made the sudden shocking change to sell my business. And when I got back, that is what I did. I never went back again. And within a few months of that happening, the sale of my business went through, the sale of my dad's house went through, and my money radically changed when it all arrived at the same time. So this gives you an idea of how change can happen very suddenly. Okay, so I'm at the end of my 15 minutes. I hope that this has served you in some way, and I will elaborate on this for you in my next video, all about Uranus entering Gemini. And I'll see you all next time.